What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Behind the Facade. Before I kick off with my usual introduction to this week's guest, I just want to quickly mention I woke up this morning to hear the sad news that Shinzo Abe, the former Prime Minister of Japan, has been assassinated, essentially, shot and killed by somebody this morning. And it's pretty shocking when a head of state or a former head of state gets taken out like that. So just wanted to kind of mention that. That is what I read. That is where we are in terms of the news cycle and things like that. My guest this week, yes, it's going to be a guest as opposed to me telling you my own insights. I'm bringing a construction and design team professional in for this week's conversation, and that is a chap by the name Paul Hemming. Now, Paul is based in the UK and he has started his own construction technology firm called C-Link. Now, what is interesting about construction? Normally, as you know, this podcast, I really focus on real estate, property investment. I go into innovation and impact occasionally, but really it's kind of investment is the area that I'm most focused on. This week, I wanted to deviate slightly. I wanted to kind of look at the whole construction sector with Paul. Now, Paul has a construction-focused podcast called Own Your Build. And so Paul comes with some interesting insights of his own. And why do I want to do this? Well, frankly, I find construction fascinating. I always really interested to walk around a construction site. I kind of grew up with my dad bringing me around construction sites when I was a young kid. And then as I kind of grew up and as I studied architecture, I used to really enjoy spending time on construction sites. And so it's been there all along. But what's also something that's important about construction is that construction, real estate investment, development, the whole thing is all very closely interlinked. Your success as an investor or in particular as a developer is all completely linked to your ability to pull together a good professional team that can actually design a building, that can come up with a good construction methodology, process, all of that stuff. And the entire thing is interlinked, and the success or failure of your project is very much tied to that team you put together. And then long after that building is finished, you lease it up, you sell it off, whatever you might do, that building stands there as a testament to you and your skills as a developer with vision, and whether or not you stuck to quality materials, whether or not you made compromises, all of that becomes clear over the years that follow. And so it's always been something that, in terms of leaving a legacy behind, it's always been something that's interesting. And so technology, construction technology, innovation in the whole construction space, something that really does interest me. So one of the reasons why probably one of my favorite YouTube channels is the B1M. And so I certainly think you guys should go and check out Paul's podcast, and I'm going to leave links and all that stuff in the show notes below. So look, without further ado, let me give you my conversation with Mr. Paul Hemming. You are listening to Behind the Facade, and I'm your host, Gavin J. Gallagher. On this podcast, I explore the mental and emotional game often playing out subconsciously, both in your mind and the mind of everyone else in the real estate or property investment market. The key to success in this game is to master your mindset and behavior, to take control of your thoughts, your emotions, and most importantly, your ego. Welcome to the show. Paul Hemming, welcome to the podcast. Tell us, where are you listening at? Where are you calling us in from today, Paul?
I'm calling in from North London, and thank you for having me on the show, Gavin.
My pleasure, Paul. And as people will learn today, Paul has a podcast of his own, so he's a dab hand at this interviewing. And,
allegedly.
Allegedly, yeah. So Paul, I mean, the thing that I like to ask my audience first and foremost is just to kind of kick it off, a little bit of context, a little bit of backstory. Tell us what Paul Hemming does.
I am 33, originally qualified as a quantity surveyor. Not the sexiest of qualifications, but that's what I did. And I spent 10 years in industry working on large projects, Battersea Power Station, 20 Fenchurch Street walkie-talkie, the Shard. So working for projects like that before I decided to have a conversation with a friend in a pub 6 years ago, where we were talking about kind of the problems that we were facing. Both of us were quantity surveyors, and he, to his credit, said, "Why don't we do something about it? Why don't we change it? Why don't we build a business that solves these problems?" And I said, "All right, let's do it." Because I'd probably had one too many drinks, and so we set up C-Link. It's a software company which basically kind of automates a lot of what a quantity surveyor does, improves the whole process, and that's what we do. And things are coming along quite nicely.
And Paul, just from the point of view of, pardon my ignorance now about your product, but would it be UK exclusive, or I have listeners listening in from different parts of the world. Would it work in Ireland or in the US or other parts of the world?
So our product is kind of twofold. Part one is where we use software to replicate what a quantity surveyor does by reading drawings, breaking things into different packages, components, and assisting with the procurement process, so tendering contracts. And part two is we have like a vetted supply chain, kind of like a marketplace of subcontractors and suppliers who kind of tap in to the system. So our system works across the world for part one, and then the supply chain as it stands is currently just based in the UK, and we're planning on growing it across Europe, focusing initially on the Commonwealth, where subcontracting and quantity surveying is very much a thing. But yeah, it will be replicable across the world in the future, let's see.
So that's your roadmap for the next sort of couple of years, is kind of to try to grow it beyond the UK borders, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, we really want to, the way that we planned the business was to focus initially on a very small area. So we focused on London, perhaps not that small, but we focused on one specific area, tried to create a solution and a supply chain that solved that area. We've done that. We've now grown out into the southeast, growing across the rest of England, then across the rest of the UK, then across probably Commonwealth, and then Europe and beyond.
Interesting. Well, we'll get into some more of that, but let's turn back the clock a little bit, because you're 33, you're started out as a quantity surveyor. I mean, let's go back to, you were in school, and what attracted you to kind of get into the construction sector or become like a design team professional?
I would say absolutely nothing, to be honest with you. I wanted to be a journalist when I was younger, and in fact, I kind of wrote to every newspaper in the country saying, "I don't want to go to university, give me a job." And all of them wrote back to me. Well, in fact, most of them didn't write back to me. The ones that did wrote back saying, go to university, we're not interested. Yeah, so I ended up thinking I would find a job that would get me university for free and get me qualified for free. Ended up being finding a job advert for trainee quantity surveyor. My best mate told me, "Do not do that job. It will make you miserable for the rest of your life. You're going to be counting bricks." I ignored him, and I have to admit that when I first started doing it, well, number one, it's not just counting bricks. But when I did first start doing it, I did think, I'm not sure if I could do this for the rest of my life. But actually, but actually, it's grew into a really interesting job, really interesting career. And what I like most about construction, even though I'm not actually physically doing it myself anymore, is the fact that you do have that takeaway of something lasting in a city, in a town, wherever, that you can put your name to. I'm really fortunate to have been on some amazing projects, like I said, the Shard, 20 Fenchurch Street, Battersea Power Station, where you walk past it and you think,
I was involved,
made a real impact there. Exactly.
Yeah. I gotta say, I relate very much to that, because my background is architecture, and I became an architect. And I'd started out not really knowing anything, but what hit me was I arrived into New York City on a family holiday, and we were staying in Midtown Manhattan, and moving from Dublin, where the tallest building is like 14 floors, to New York City, where you're literally getting a sore neck looking up at these towers.
Can't help it though, can you?
It's just incredible. And you're just standing there looking up, going, my God, these buildings are so huge. And that was so impactful on me that I came back from that holiday at 15, I think, or something like that. And just, right, I am going to be involved in some way. Oh, well, it's funny. I didn't even know there were, about architecture and all that. I started drawing these skyscrapers. I was into, really? I like drawing, and I used to sit down on a drawing board and like draw skyscrapers that I had seen in New York. And I started to measure them and like get the exact to scale height and stuff. And I'd compare, tiny little ones in Ireland with these huge big towers and the Empire State and all that. And I kind of got obsessed, and I started doing it for months. And really? I can remember family members like coming in, like aunties and uncles and stuff, saying, God, you're really good at this, Kevin. You should be an architect. And that's when it entered the mind, is like, oh, what's architecture? And then it was explained to me that this is, the guys that design the buildings and so on and so forth.
You see, that's a far more charming story than me picking up a newspaper advert and my best mate telling me, don't do that, you'll be miserable forever. You were doing your dream.
Well, it's all about, it's funny, different things like inspiration can kind of strike you in different ways. But in terms of just the next steps, like I was looking at your LinkedIn, which is very impressive, by the way, 20,000 followers plus. But in terms of your jobs, Alumet and Permastilisa or whatever, those, I actually know Permastilisa because they did a building here in Dublin.
Dublin, yeah. And quite a few, right?
Yeah, I can remember thinking, oh wow, that facade is absolutely like pristine. It's just beautiful. And so clearly the facade technology and that kind of space, those two businesses, that was where you kind of were before you started your own business. And is that where you got involved in the shard and things like that? It was the external kind of skin.
That was always the nice bit about what I did as well, in that I always worked in building envelopes, so like you say, the pretty exterior, the glazing, everything. So actually, when you are walking past a project, or when I was walking past a project, I've been involved, you can very much see specifically what it was that you did. And that's the bit that looks nice, as opposed to, like the M&E or something. So that's always, I guess, why even more so I was, you're always quite proud of walking past these buildings.
It's very tangible. I mean, an outside envelope, especially the beautiful kind of glazed, when it's super clean and stuff, it's really noticeable. I remember when I was studying architecture back in the 90s, like I remember reading about, learning about Norman Foster. And Norman Foster did this building called the Willis Farber building in, I'm not sure what part of England it is, but he did it in the 60s. And it was just this glass skin. And I mean, it's absolutely out of this world, like so different from everything else that you've ever seen. And that really made an impression. And since then, it's there, this kind of technology, external facades and things like that, they can be really impressive. And so going from being an employee working in a big firm, what was the mindset? I mean, you met your mate and you had a chat and you thought, let's go and do this. I mean, when you walk away from, you said you had a few drinks too many. I mean,
always.
Jokes aside, I mean, what was the next couple of weeks or months like before the actual business was set up? Because presumably you don't walk in the next day and say, right, I quit. There's a little bit of prep work that people like to do so that they're not jumping from a paying job into zero.
Absolutely.
Tell us what that process looked like.
Well, actually, believe it or not, one of my old director, very charming Irish chap from Dublin, actually, he gave me some pretty great advice when I look at it in retrospect. He said to me, I didn't run in the following day and with my hangover and say, see you later, it's all done. But I was all for the rat race at one point. I was climbing the ladder, but it kind of dawned on me it wasn't what I wanted to do. But anyway, after a few months of planning and realizing this is something we're actually going to do, I kind of went in and said, I'm going to leave. This is why. And he kind of offered me a hybrid approach for a period of time where he kind of said, if you really want it to be a success, money is the thing that's going to drive it. One of the things that will pull you away from it is the fact that it's not making money instantly, and you're going to want to feed yourself. And so I kind of, for 12 months or so, really kind of was in a transition between the two, till we were in a position where we were really revenue generating, could employ people. And that was, without that, I think there may have been a slightly different path that we'd have taken, because naturally there is a pressure, isn't there, to bring money in and sustain yourself.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, it sounds like you had a really decent boss working, like to give you that. Well, I suppose it's self-serving as well, because he doesn't lose somebody who's on his team that he doesn't, but at the end of the day, he could have, I know a lot of people out there that have had pretty nasty bosses who are like, right out the door, you will be escorted to the front, to the street, basically, like,
Yeah, I think it was mutually beneficial, but absolutely, he was there's a few of my other bosses. I had some pretty good bosses in the 10 years or so I was working. Maybe 50% of them would have been nice. 50% of them would have said, all the best, see you later, good luck.
Sling your hook,
Exactly, yeah.
And in terms of Perma and Alumet and stuff, is there any linkage between them now and your business, C-Link, or is it they're much, much bigger businesses?
Not really, no. I mean, what we are trying to deliver with C-Link is effectively giving SMEs the scale of like the tier one contractors who have all these supply chain directors, QSs, etc. So we're trying to build a supply chain which meets their needs. We have done, or we're now actually starting to do, pretty large schemes where your Alumets and your Perma could start to be involved, but that isn't our core business model. We haven't been able to utilize those relationships yet that we had. So we're largely focused on the SME market, to be honest with you, because both of those, particularly Perma are, I think they're the biggest or the second biggest cladding contractor in the world. So only the big stuff for them. We haven't been offered the shard yet, is what I'll say.
And just in terms of, I mean, the challenges that you face, you mentioned the supply chain. I mean, obviously coming out of COVID now, we've been facing some serious supply chain issues. Like, how has that affected the business? Is it affecting the business? Is it an opportunity? How does it pan out for you?
I would say it's more an opportunity than anything. Naturally, the supply chain, whoever you are, and the impacts of what's happening at the moment is hurting everyone. But what it is doing is making people think even more in detail about the competitive tender process, which is something which we're pushing, something which I felt at my time in my career that wasn't something that I could always do, because the tools weren't there for me to be able to speak to 5 of the perfect subcontractors and go out to them professionally. So now the fact that you have that with C-Link, and the fact that people are looking to find ways to make sure they're getting the right value for money, they're getting what the market is actually at, has probably brought us more of an opportunity than anything. But in terms of the wider industry, there's no doubt it's been an absolute nightmare. I think material costs are 20% up year on year. So what it has meant is that some of our clients, who are either typically developers, like end user clients, or main contractors, so the developers would actually have delays in planning through 2021, which then means by the time they get to the end of the year, the projects become almost unfeasible, because the construction costs have gone up 15-20%, and there's not a huge amount anyone can do to help you with that right now, other than making sure that you're getting a competitive process. But challenge for the industry for sure, as I'm sure you're well aware.
Yeah, well, it's funny. This morning I was having a conversation with one of my contractors, subcontractors, and they were telling me that they're ordering in stainless steel. They're doing a project for us at the moment, and they were saying that the pricing is 5 days. Like after 5 days, you have to get it repriced, because that's the speed at which all of this stuff is.
Yeah, we've had one of our suppliers, subcontractors, say that now they're on 20 for steel specifically, 24 hours, which is absolutely mental. But one of the largest steel mills is in Ukraine. I think it does X million tons a year, and it's obviously been closed for 7 months now. So that not only did we have all the problems from 2021, but that's now also impacting
Yeah.
22. So it's a real
And
supply issue.
China is talking about, you've got China doing these lockdowns because of COVID. There is zero
Mm.
COVID policy and stuff. It's a real challenge. And we're building houses in Dublin at the moment, and we have 54 units under construction. And we had initially designed it to be built in timber frame, and we couldn't get the timber frame on site for something like 16 weeks. And so we had to, we had initially thought within 2 weeks we'd have the stuff on site, and it was like, no, it's going to be 16 weeks because of various delays. And so we had to pivot immediately into construction using masonry and brickwork and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And so we brought in all the brickies and the block layers, and then those guys suddenly they started upping the prices, and suddenly they were leaving to other jobs and stuff. And so there was a doubling of the labor cost in that period of time. And so it's been a real mess. And the only thing that has saved us from actually going into a loss on the project is the fact that the market is pretty buoyant. So people are paying more. So what we initially thought we'd sell the property for is now higher. And so that's obviously balanced out those issues.
How is the labour market in Ireland? Because that's another untold story here in the UK, obviously post Brexit, is that not only have you got all of these issues with supply that everyone has, but we were already short on labour and skilled workforce before. It's even worse now. So brickies, particularly other trades as well, it's kind of sit back and name the number almost.
Name the price. Yeah, it is a little bit like that. I tell you what, we have this added problem it's a separate problem to obviously Brexit has really impacted the UK with the fact that so many of the foreign guys that would have come in and worked, they're no longer coming in because they don't know how long they can stay and all that. But in Ireland, what we have is we have this acute housing crisis, and it is so acute that I know a friend of mine has a recruitment business, and she has 70 Croatian laborers that are ready to move to Dublin in an instant to work on projects and stuff. Okay. And we can't get them accommodation. And that's what's actually making it impossible. And we've agreed to take, I think, 210,000 Ukrainian refugees. And we already had no accommodation. And so where 210,000 Ukrainian refugees are going to go, nobody knows. So what the government have actually done, and the local authorities, they've started renting rooms in hotels and bed and breakfasts and all this. And so up and down the country, you look for a hotel room, it's twice the price now because they've got most of their rooms pre-let out to the refugees, and so the few rooms that are left, they're able to double their rates basically. And so even like a little 3-star hotel, like they're charging 250 a night and things like this.
Wow. So, well, I was planning on coming to Ireland this year, but I might stick a pin in that now.
Well, if you are coming, you must coordinate with me, and we'll go and have it so that you can do some speaking or something like that to our audience. Sure. But really, you will need to go and plan carefully around your accommodation, because it's either super expensive or impossible to get.
Or I'll have to stay at the family. They'll have to put me up.
Yeah, well, that's okay. Do you have family living in Ireland?
I've got most of my dad's side of the family are Irish, so they're from Wexford, Kilmuckridge, Blackwater, that kind of area. So so I often would go there and see them, but there's a few in Dublin as well, and I do love Dublin, I have to say.
So many do. Paul, I just want to kind of move the story along. Tell us about, C-Link procurement software for construction SMEs. What are the big challenges facing you as you and your partner have decided to kind of establish the business? What are the big challenges that you're facing as a business owner at the moment in this?
Scaling probably is the thing. I mean, we're a tech business, so the tech scales nicely, as you can imagine. But as I said, the business is 2 parts. The second part being the supply chain. So we're trying to scale the supply chain, build a robust quality supply chain as well. We're not trying to be the yellow pages, if you like. We don't want to be Google and be a big long list of everyone. We wouldn't mind Google's revenues, to be honest with you, but we don't want to be we don't want to be a big long list of every contractor. We're trying to be a curated list of quality contractors, which is one of our USPs, but is also one of our challenges as a business in terms of scale, because we have to go through a vetting process to have the good guys, but in doing so, it obviously takes time to do that. That's one challenge among many others. We're really lucky and fortunate, actually, that in terms of the team that we've got, we're a team of 12 now, and everyone that is on the team at the moment is absolutely phenomenal, fully committed, really engaged, and that is amazing. We're trying to again scale the team up, so obviously recruitment then becomes a challenge, which isn't easy for anyone, but yeah, scaling is probably the main thing.
And tell me this: did you get a financial backing, or are you bootstrapping?
We bootstrapped for the first period, and then we've had some angel investment more recently, and we're planning probably a larger round of investment to support the scale now that we've proven concept and much more, to be honest with you. But now that we've done that, we're looking for a larger round of investment in the next 12 months.
Right. Okay. Makes sense. Yeah. And tell me, just from the point of view of, okay, so your business is facing your own kind of challenges and growing and things like that. But what about the construction industry in general? I mean, you've got the supply chain issues that we've talked about. You've now got the inflationary cost issues, and you've also got the cost of living out there that is making, I think, general families that are kind of trying to afford rent and mortgages and things like that. Where do you see the next? Are you kind of looking ahead and trying to read the tea leaves? Where do you see the economy going in the next year or two?
I am no economist, Gavin, far from it. I mean, it's a funny one because construction, the UK has a housing crisis, not dissimilar to the one obviously different, but not dissimilar to the one you were describing in Ireland, where we're short a few million houses, basically, and we're trying to deliver 350,000 houses a year. We never deliver it. It gets worse and worse each year. So clearly there is demand for construction. So the long-term picture is a relatively rosy one.
Yeah.
But, it does look very much like a recession or some kind of economic hit, if it hasn't already started, is not too far away. And when that happens, construction is the first thing to take a hit. It's the first thing to take a hit. So we are mindful that it's quite likely that a recession and therefore some challenge to the wider industry is on the cards. Whether that impacts us directly, I'm sure it will, but whether it's a bad thing for business or a good thing for business, I'm not 100% sure, because it might actually, again, focus energy into competitive tendering for the subcontractors. They will be more interested in finding work. So it's a bit of an unusual one for us, where perhaps a recession isn't a complete disaster for us as a business.
Yeah, I was thinking that exactly, and we face the same challenges you're talking about it every year. Ireland obviously is a much smaller economy size, but we need to build 50,000 houses a year just to meet the demand of the growing population.
Do you hit that target each year?
We are delivering currently about 20 to 30,000 a year.
Okay.
And so, I mean, at one stage, if you go back to 2007, we were doing 90,000 a year.
When it was party time.
When it was party time. And also we had the entire country was filled with, foreign laborers and all this, and a lot of Irish businesses and labor and stuff. And when the 2008 recession hit, and it went on for so many years, it went on for like 5 or 6 years. And at the end of that 5 or 6 years, like, it was decimated. There was only maybe 10% of the labor force left in the country. So you're not able to restart at the same level, because just everyone has moved and lives in another country now, so huge numbers of people move to the US, to the Australia, and you meet people and you start families, and you get into the kind of routine of, my kids go to school there now, so we're not going to move now, and so it's very difficult to kind of get it back. And at one stage we were at 8,000 houses a year, and then it's crept up now to something like 25 or 26,000. But we're still about 50% shy of the figure we need to be at. And that being the case, just the acute short, it just gets worse and worse, because
Exactly.
50,000 is what you need just to sort of reach equilibrium. So if you're short of that every year, it's just getting worse and worse.
Worsening and worsening. Yeah.
Yeah. Very similar issues. And one of the things that I see as a big challenge is sustainability and carbon emissions and all of this stuff. It's something that I'm paying quite a lot of attention to. I run a business park, and we have office buildings that we're trying to, well, we have tenants in a lot of them, but some of them have become vacant in recent times. And we're in the process of using contractors to kind of get us up to, bring us up to a certain level of sustainability.
Yeah.
Whereas older office buildings, the last generation or previous even to that, they're very dated buildings and they're not efficient energy wise. And there's a lot of carbon emissions and stuff. That all has to change. And the problem that we're seeing is that as time moves forward, it's getting even, you can actually see the writing on the wall that even things like demolition will be difficult to do in the future, because all of that construction that's sitting there already, the old
embodied
building,
carbon, isn't it?
There's that embodied carbon, and it's like, well, if you can't take it down, what can you do with it? And so it's reusing existing structure and all of that, and it's becoming more and more complicated. Do you see that any kind of early signs of that yourself, or?
I mean, we do actually. When I'm meeting interesting people myself on our podcast, it's obviously a hot topic at the moment, something we talk about. But actually quite hopeful about that, particularly with architects like yourselves, like people who can, almost reimagine how we use stock, because the way we've been building is pretty, when you reflect on it, it's pretty crazy, really, the way we've been building, where you throw something up, knock it down 30 years later, throw something up, knock it down 30 years later. And I think there's got to be a change. I think change is coming, and I think the forward momentum is there. And I think there's enough really intelligent, clever people and businesses working towards that. But embodied carbon and all of those things, they're all, it's funny. I mean, we're at the cutting edge to some degree because we're a ConTech business.
Yeah.
I'm speaking to lots of interesting people on the podcast, but that's still only really a phrase that came to my recognition 8-10 weeks ago. So wow. It's not,
ConTech is new. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, so it's I mean, embodied carbon, I didn't really, it's not something that was in my vision, if you know what I mean. So
yeah.
I think people are adapting, and I'm confident that we will change. And I'm no designer, I'm not creative in that way, but I do think that we'd have to imagine a different way of using buildings in an intelligent way to be more sustainable.
I've seen, just as a kind of an insight into some of the conversations that I've had. So we have a lot of multinational tenants in our office buildings here, and one of them is kind of an Irish. It's a state or partly state-owned business, and they are highly focused on their sustainability, their carbon footprint, and all this. And we were having a conversation, and those guys are getting into real, meticulous, granular detail into where's the emissions being made. And so we were talking about, they have little kitchenettes on each floor of their building, and at night there was a little power spike every 30 minutes, and they were like, what is that? And they were actually reviewing their building information management system, and they could see that there was this blip of power usage, and they were like, so they were going down, they were looking, and they explored, and they found that these kitchenettes have the little water heaters. And of course, the water heater doesn't know that everyone has gone home for the day, and it just keeps on clicking on to boil the water every 30 minutes or whatever.
Oh, really?
And they realized, there you go. There's where the culprit is. So they put in just a timer switch so that the thing turns on at 8 a.m. and turns off at sort of 6 or whatever. And that's the kind of level of detail that these guys are starting to look at. And so from that, you can see, I mean, the other thing, you've got ConTech, but prop tech is the area that I kind of hear a lot about. And the whole building, the BIM and the building information and digital twins. And I saw that your recent podcast, you had somebody talking about the digital twins and stuff.
Yeah, fascinating stuff that was.
It really is. And where I can really see the benefits of all that kind of stuff is that we're looking at a building now at the moment that has just become vacant, and we're questioning our design team, like, what can we do to it? What if we replace all of the light bulbs, because it's an older building, like replace all the light bulbs with LED, like what will that do in terms of emissions? And what if we rip out the boiler plant and put in an electrical powered boiler? And what if we, take out all the air conditioning systems and put in brand new ones that are efficient and run on electricity? And the problem is they have to go off and do all these calculations. Whereas with a digital twin, it's just click, 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 and it's done,
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's really fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. The digital twin is really something, again, really interesting conversation I had a few months ago, where it just makes you think the way we've been doing it is so backward almost. When we've got all these technologies, why not have a exact digital twin of a building that you can then replicate? But turning to your point about sustainability, I guess with corporate clients, the thing being now, if they're coming into this business part, they will want to know specifically what your output is, what their carbon emissions will be using that. So again, I feel like at the beginning of my career, going back to 2007, 2010, that period of time when I started, sustainability was a thing, but particularly in construction, it felt very much like, tokenistic lip service, like, we'll do it. Even at the top, the clients would say we need to be doing something, but it wasn't inherently deeply in our mindsets. Whereas now, not only is it for clients, but it is very much in the mindset of the sector and the clever people who are trying to change how we build. So I'm optimistic about it.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, definitely the mood has changed. And what's really changed is the attitude towards greenwashing. And,
Exactly.
people before would sort of say, oh, look, let's just, put a thing on, like, showing a recycled symbol, or, a little green plant or a leaf or something. And that's enough. And it's actually reputationally more damaging to be seen to be greenwashing than it is not to be environmentally conscious. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
That you're actually abusing the system is worse than just not being aware and being kind of ignorant of it. But both options, like being ignorant or greenwashing, could signal like real reputational damage. And so people are starting to wake up to this. We have a tenant that went after a bid for a project recently, and they thought they were going to win it, and they ended up losing it because they didn't have an electric car fleet. And suddenly they were like, what? And we've been hearing all about it because they want to know how many electric car charging stations is there and things like that. But it's really starting to filter in. Whereas before, you would, we were being asked these questions and it was kind of like just a throwaway question. But now it's actually directly impacting their viability and things like that. So it is very interesting. Tell us, Paul, in terms of establishing your podcast. I mean, I know when I set up this podcast, it was kind of a lockdown project. I didn't actually, I didn't really know what was the point. But in terms of your, clearly you're reaching out there into the industry and you're finding interesting conversations with people. What has establishing your podcast, what has that done for your business?
Good question. Well, we kind of started it in January 2021, which it's hard. All these lockdowns kind of like merge into one now. But it was, I think, when we were in deepest, the first lockdown was kind of charming to some degree by the fact that it was novel.
Yes.
But here in the UK, we went into a lockdown over Christmas, effectively.
I remember. Yeah, I remember.
Like December the 15th through to February the 15th. So it was brutal, and it's so dark here. And we started it in January 2021. No one should go and do this, but the first podcast that we recorded, we would do video as well. My hair, my missus was cutting my hair. My hair is an absolute state. So what it has done for my business is it's completely ruined my reputation because my hair was awful in those first videos. But all jokes aside, we've been going as a business for 5-6 years now, and when we started, what I was very focused on in terms of how we outwardly market was knowledge sharing. In construction, we're a fragmented industry where nobody really wants to help each other. It's all look out for yourself. And it's a really confusing jargon filled industry as well. So kind of when I first ever started as a trainee quantity surveyor, I was creating my own glossary of terms and trying to keep up with whatever everyone was saying in the office. And so that kind of was how we went out with marketing initially. So we did a lot of blogging, lots of newsletters, ebooks, templates, where it was effectively just trying to share knowledge. And that worked really well for us in the first few years. And we wanted to convert the written format, the success we had with writing, into audio and video. So we set up a new podcast in 2021. What it's done for the business is hard in some ways to define, I think. I was actually talking to someone about this the other day, in that, a typical marketing campaign, you say, I'm going to reach out to these 100 people, 10 of them will respond, 3 of them will buy my product. There's my ROI. Whereas with a podcast, you don't really, I'm sure you know this, who the hell is listening right now? Yeah. And to that degree, you're kind of throwing yourself out into the ether and seeing what comes back, and stuff does come back. I'm forever surprised by bumping into people or meeting people, or them calling me or me calling them, and them saying, oh yeah, listen to your podcast. You think, okay, fine. It's just, which is heartwarming. And so what it's really done is 2 things. It's gives you a bit of a persona, if you like, and makes people feel like they know you, which then when you're meeting them, networking, trying to sell,
like and trust. Yeah, like and trust.
It's almost like you've kind of solved that problem to start with. And then we interview once a week really interesting people from construction, usually people with amazing careers. So we've interviewed like the president of the Institute of Civil Engineers, people of that stature, really interesting people. And I am not someone who particularly enjoys networking. It's not something I particularly love doing. But what I've found personally, if you like, with the podcast is that it's put me in a circle of people that otherwise I wouldn't necessarily be able to connect with, speak with, and you speak to these really interesting people, and you actually instantly have a bit of a relationship with them, having sat as we're doing now and chatted for half an hour, 40 minutes or an hour one-on-one, which is very hard to achieve. So that has been really powerful, I've found, for my networking, if you like.
Yeah, I can relate to that. And one of the things that that I get an awful lot of satisfaction from is when I get messages from listeners saying, I really loved that episode, or that helped me.
Yeah, it's great, isn't it?
It just makes you kind of, I'm going to go and double down now and make even more.
It is worth speaking to people like Paul Hemming after all. If you grind through it, it might be all right.
Tell us, Paul, in terms of the success you've enjoyed to date. I mean, what would you say the behaviors and the habits that you've installed just in day-to-day kind of life? What does anything stand out as being particularly helpful, or has helped you kind of navigate your way through the struggles?
Well, there's still many struggles. I can very much assure you of that, and
well, I can assure you they won't go away. Struggles are there. I'm going to be 50 this year, and I can tell you that it doesn't get any easier as you get older.
Yeah. Well, I'm not looking forward to that, because I was hoping they were going to go away at some point. But for me, it's always just been about being really good to the people around you, your team. I know that might sound really cheesy or simple, but they're the people that are working for your goal as a business owner. So I've always tried my best to create an environment where they're happy, content, and understand what we're trying to achieve. And then just personally, I'm just try to be really consistent with my week, if that makes sense. So like time that you're getting up, what you're doing, what you're trying to achieve, and that's about it, really. I just tried to do that, and I've got it far from cracked, I can assure you. Gavin, I'm not sure if anyone should really take that on board.
Well, no, I got to say, I straight away, I relate to consistency. I mean, I have a couple of core values that I kind of believe in, and one of them is consistency. It's just, whether that's showing up every day to work out, whether it's in the way you hit your social media. I mean, this episode that we're recording now is going to be episode 116. That's 116 weeks consistently without missing a single
That's amazing.
week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have to say, I think that's exactly what a podcast should be as well. You know, you strive to get an audience, and they want to know that Monday at 8 o'clock or whenever I can listen to that if I want to. So I think consistency, and the podcast is a really good way of seeing it. And kudos for 100 plus. That's amazing.
Yeah, what's interesting about it is when I started out, I spoke to a friend who has a successful podcast, and he said that something like 70% of the podcasts that are on the internet don't get beyond 3 episodes or 5 episodes or something like that. And he said, like, if you can get to 10 episodes, he says you're in the top 30. Like, and I remember thinking, like, whoa, that's interesting. And then there's some of the big ones like Tim Ferriss and people like that. You kind of just see what they've grown into, and it's staggering,
crazy, isn't it?
like it's staggering. And Paul, I'm conscious of time. I usually ask my guests a final couple of questions, and one of them is, knowing now what you know at the ripe old age of 33, what advice would you give, say, 17-year-old Paul, who's coming out of school and you're kind of thinking, okay, what are the mistakes that I made that I could sidestep if I had a second chance?
Oh, that's a tough question, because I've made a lot of mistakes. I would actually probably say, do not get too hung up on not being a journalist. Because I reflect now on that, and I was absolutely adamant and desperate to be a written journalist. And if I look back now and think, would I want to be doing that now? Absolutely not. But that's probably like counterproductive to what most people would think. But I reflect on what I was desperate to be, and actually think now I wouldn't want to be that. But it's hard to tell yourself that as a young teenager, isn't it?
It is. And you know what's interesting, though, what immediately strikes me about that ambition is that having a podcast is a step towards being a journalist. Like, you are putting yourself out there, asking questions. It is essentially what a journalist does. And obviously it's not in the written form, but you have kind of, in a sense, ticked that box.
Somehow got back to it. Yeah, that's probably why. That's funny, isn't it? It's probably why doing the podcast is the bit that I enjoy most of my weekly schedule. So there you go. Yeah. There you go. I am being a journalist. I'll take that.
You managed to get back to it. Paul, if people wanted to learn more about your podcast or your business or anything like that, what are the links that they can go and check out?
So the website is C as in the letter -link.com. So the business is called C-Link. You can check out the business there if you're interested. Own the Build is the name of my podcast, and it's on Apple, Spotify, all the usual places. And yeah, if you want to get in touch, feel free to do that. Emails at paul@c-link.com. I look forward to hearing from anyone.
And I'm sure LinkedIn will feature somewhere in your social media, given 21,000 followers.
It is in there, yes.
It is in there. Paul, it's been great chatting to you. Really appreciate your time, and wishing you the very best of luck with your business and podcast.
Thanks, Gavin. It's been a real pleasure to be here, and you're a fantastic host. I've really enjoyed it, mate.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Behind the Facade. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Paul Hemming today. Please do check out the show notes down below. If you enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to leave a review over on iTunes, wherever it might be. And also, if you're looking at this on YouTube, maybe hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions or topics you'd like me to cover in future episodes, connect with me via the Facebook group that is Behind the Facade Community. And when you're in there, you can go and connect with me directly. Alternatively, you can reach out to me on social media. My handle is Gavin J. Gallagher. And you can also follow a lot of my latest updates and stuff by joining the email list and my tribe over at gavinjgallagher.com. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this week's podcast. Catch you all same time next week.